Well, Colonel Douglas MacGregor is very much the oracle. He is the man we always turn to in crisis. He's the man who has shed so much light on military and political affairs in the United States and across the world over recent years. He's still the author of the biggest ever single clip that we have ever recorded here on the mother of all talk shows. He's a retired U.S. Army colonel, no less. And once upon a time, generations gone by, a compatriot of mine, no doubt. Colonel MacGregor, welcome back to the show. A hearty welcome back to the show. Can we begin, though with so many wars to choose from, to your interpretation of the current situation in the Persian Gulf? Donald Trump seems to zigzag between telling us it's all over and peace, if not amity, is going to reign, and telling us that all that's going to reign is very, very severe weapons and more war in the Gulf. Which is it, do you think?
Well, it's difficult to keep score. I think you've got a point, George. By the way, it's good to see you again and looking well.
Thank you, sir.
I think that right now the president is caught in a position he never wanted to be in. I can tell you from my limited exposure to him in the first term that war with Iran is something he wanted to avoid. He absolutely did not want to be drawn into it. And ultimately, when he had his first sort of brush with it after the 12-day war where Israel was suffering very badly under missile attack by Iran, he launched these B-2s and then announced to everybody in the world that the war was over. And I think he genuinely wanted it to be over, George. But then after multiple visits from Mr. Netanyahu, and I think from his campaign donors who were ultimately responsible for his position in the White House, he was dragged into the war. The Israelis launched it, and then he was obligated to follow suit. We have lost the war, George, militarily. This is a war that militarily we cannot win. We don't have the right weapons for it. We're not organized to do it. We're confronting a fundamentally new way of war that Iran has mastered. And this has been a serious strategic setback for the United States from that standpoint, because a lot of people are now aware of the limitations on American military power that previously they were unaware of. And the second part of it is that we do not have any peace negotiations underway. We have this thing they call a memorandum of understanding, which is not terribly popular because it essentially codifies the loss that we have sustained. I don't think you're going to get an agreement, ultimately. I think it's an impossibility because the Israelis are not going to allow it to happen. And they're not going to allow it to happen because they are now in a fight for their very existence. This is an existential threat to Israel if it is ultimately approved in any form. And they want to make sure that we never disengage and that we stay engaged in a perpetual conflict, because that's what they must have if they are to have not only their greater Israel project at this point, but to actually survive.
But don't you think, Colonel, that a more likely outcome is a period of no war, no peace? Neither one thing nor the other, just constant low grumble and rumble with periodic flashes of violence, because that suits both sides rather well. I spoke to a very influential Iranian indeed this very day. And while he did not say that that's what would likely happen, he did not demur when I said that was likely to be the outcome. Neither war nor peace, just a continuation with all of its problems of what we have now.
Well, the problem with that particular outlook is the destructive impact on the global economy. We're dealing now with not just not supply demand destruction. We have supply chain destruction. We have supply chain problems. We have weaponized checkpoints, higher food and fuel inflation, slower growth. And the president himself stated it very clearly when he was in Versailles. He said, we're on the road to a global depression. He's correct. the longer this lasts, the worse this gets, because we're looking at losses and shortages across a wide range of petroleum products. And these losses are not going to be made good quickly. Let's say that you're successful in loading up 1,000 ships with oil and sending them out. Well, it takes time for them to reach their destination. They'll be offloaded, and then they've got to return. None of it's happening quickly. Right now, there's a trickle moving through the Gulf, and that's for good reason. Nobody trusts the circumstances. No one is sure of what's going to happen. So I would say, no, that's unacceptable. And I think the only solution for us to really end this war and get out of it, which is what President Trump wants, and I think most Americans do, is to disengage militarily, pull out, get out of the area. Because as long as we are in the region in any way, shape, or form, we are at risk of being drawn back into the conflict. And the second time around, it could be much, much worse than it was the first time around. Iran is stronger now than it's ever been. It has more capability than it's ever had. On the other hand, our capabilities are largely unchanged, and we have ultimately sacrificed a lot of our arsenal in order to participate in this war on behalf of Israel. And that's tough, because that means that President Trump has to tell the Israelis effectively, we're out. If you want to continue this, you're on your own. He can't really do that with the Congress, since the Israeli lobby, the Jewish lobby in Washington, owns Congress, as well as essentially, for all intents and purposes, the White House. And that's the only problem I see with your poll right now. You say your polling question is the wrong one. The American people, more than 70% of Americans want nothing to do with this war and would eagerly walk away. It's not a question of the American people. It's the government. And the government is totally unresponsive to the American people, which is certainly something you're familiar with, since you're dealing with exactly the same damn thing in London. So the problem right now is, can President Trump stand up to Israel? I'm not sure he can.
Well, of course, the scenario you describe is what I myself hope for and agree is the only real solution. But the limitations, the parameters that seem set in stone at this point in time, make it very unlikely that the United States can, or will rather, just walk away. Katz, the Israeli defense minister, was very blunt this afternoon. He said, we will not be withdrawing from the southern Lebanon. Hundreds of thousands of Lebanese will not be allowed to return to their homes, whether there is an American instruction or not. Now, we've all had teenage children, Colonel. There is a point at which you can no longer necessarily instruct your teenage son what he needs to do. And if he said, no, Father, I'm not going to do it, you really don't have much that you can do about that.
Well, the risk for the Israelis, as well as for us here in the United States, is the following. If President Trump simply wallows in the middle, in other words, he sits on the fence, he doesn't really take decisive action one way or the other, which, of course, is what we've done in Ukraine. Let's be clear, that Ukraine is very much in the same category right now for us. He wants out of that. He wants out of the war in the Middle East, but he's unwilling to take or afraid to take the action necessary. So what does it mean? Well, it chokes off hundreds of millions of people from liquefied natural gas around the world, residential heating, cooking, and industrial manufacturing. It blocks the export of roughly 30% of the global supply of ammonia-based nitrogen fertilizer, halts the production of 30% of the world's helium, which are used, as you know, in semiconductors, medical imaging devices. Here at home, it means that inflation is unchecked. Here at home, it means the bond market will eventually collapse, just as the gilt market is going to collapse where you are. When that happens, and I think we're coming to that probably in the fall at the latest, could happen before the end of the summer, people will start talking about removing President Trump. I think you'll probably be on at least another one or two prime ministers by then.
Yeah, well, we've had 7 in 10 years. We've caught the Italian disease. We used to laugh I recall vividly my father used to laugh at the Italians and their constantly revolving cabinets and prime ministers. That's now us. Now, I see behind you a rather fine bust of Napoleon on this day, or rather yesterday. Napoleon marched on Moscow. It didn't succeed, indeed failed utterly, as did a later European invasion of Russia, led by the Austrian corporal. But the Germans and the French and the British, perhaps most of all, are still not ready to talk. They're still not ready to negotiate an end to this conflict. And sometimes you wonder if they're not preparing to have another go and to send their forces into Russia. They're already sending their missiles. I'm filled with a kind of gloom about what the future is for the Ukrainian front. What about you, Colonel?
Well, my impression is that the majority of Scots, English, Welsh, and Irish citizens of Great Britain would prefer the British Army stay home and protect them, as opposed to going overseas to fight in some stupid war in Ukraine. I don't think there's much support over in your country for a war with Russia. I don't see any evidence based on all of my friends that I have in Germany for many years. Remember, I lived in that country off and on for almost 8 years, and I studied there, went to school there. There's no support for a war against Russia. I think Mr. Putin knows that. If you saw his most recent speech, where it was directed at Germany, you could have directed it to all of Europe, but certainly the Germans largely agreed with Putin. The problem is that the Germans and the French and the British all seem to have the same problem that we've got right now. That is, you've got to get rid of your government. How do you get rid of these people? They're like a returning bout of terminal disease. You can't seem to get rid of it. You've got to get rid of the government. We need the Second Republic. We're still living in the First Republic, George, from the 1780s when we wrote the Constitution. That's hard to believe. We're the First Republic. I was talking to a French friend of mine. I said, "You've had 5 of them. You need a new one. You need the 6th. We're working on the 2nd." Well, I think the British are in the need of the same thing. Nobody needs to go to war with Russia. That's absurd. It makes no sense. You were 100% right. We just need to disengage from this tragedy in the Middle East. Iran is not our enemy. There was no need for us to go to war with Iran. It's ridiculous nonsense. All of this is because of Israel and because of Israel's international financial power, which resides largely but not exclusively in New York City. That's why we've gone to war, and it's got to stop. The sooner it stops, the sooner we end this, and the sooner we break that power over us, the healthier we're all going to be. And I hope that that's going to happen. I think you're closer to it right now than we are. The kinds of things that are happening in your country, in France and Germany, the criminality, the civil unrest, this is only going to get worse. And the economic situation that's coming, that's going to be catastrophic, is going to make it much worse. But it's also going to hit us. I think Western civilization is about to go in for an overhaul. I think we're about to see something on the scale of the revolutions of 1848. Now, will they look like the French Revolution individually in each country? I have no idea. It depends. I know there's a lot of pent-up frustration and anger inside the United States. And remember that everything that President Trump promised, he's failed to deliver on. That has not bypassed any of us. People want action, and they finally realized, George, these elections don't matter. It doesn't matter what you vote for. You get the same bad outcome. When it reaches that point, there's only one way to go, and that is a rebellion, a revolution of some kind. Everybody wants it to be peaceful. We'd all like it to be bloodless, but we know better. It's not going to be. It's going to be painful because of the economic dimension. There's no way around it. I wish I had some good news
was,
for you.
Of course, I was going to say we employ you, but of course we don't pay you. Although if we did, we couldn't pay you enough for the sagacity that you bring to the proceedings. But We need to face facts. Now, 1848 was the year of revolutions. This looks more like a kind of Weimar to me. And we all know what happened at the end of the Weimar Republic and the collapse into one or other kind of fascism in Italy and Germany, and very nearly in other places also, cannot be ruled out. You know, from my political perspective, fascism represents only the wiping. Yeah, go on.
Well, George, I agree with your essential point on Weimar. I think you modify that model depending upon the country. We may be closer to that than any of you. But having said all of that, the outcome of Weimar was never absolute or inevitable. And you brought up this invasion of the Soviet Union. That was never necessary. That could have easily been avoided. And if the Germans had avoided that, Germany was roaring back to good health, economically, socially, politically, culturally. And I don't see any appetite right now inside Europe for territorial conquest in other people's countries. I just don't see it. I don't see any interest in the United States in invading anybody else's country right now. People are saying we should not meddle in other people's countries. In fact, if you look at the 14 points that we agreed to with the Iranians as a basis for discussion that became this MOU, one of the things in there that we agreed to was we will not meddle in the internal affairs of Iran. Well, hallelujah. Thank God. We don't want to. What I'm saying is that the potential for the kind of Napoleonic explosion of conquest or the Hitlerian fantasy in the Soviet Union, that's non-existent. I'm not worried about that. But what you do have, and you're absolutely right, we have a problem with who is really British, who is really an American, who is really French, who is really German. That's the thing that nobody wants to talk about publicly. If you say everybody can be everything, then we are all nothing. That's unacceptable. We have to define who we are. Now, that may not be exactly the same as what we've been for hundreds of years, but we need to do it. And we need to take care of the people who are us. Every government needs to provide for shelter, food, and security. That's what we expect our governments to do. When they don't do that, we should get rid of them. Your government is not providing adequate shelter, protection, and food for its own people. And that's the problem. Instead, they're condemning your people. They're treating their own people with contempt. We treat Americans with contempt here. And we open the gates and we threw it open under Biden and let millions of people in this country that we can't afford, who did not come here to become Americans, who are never going to be like us. So how do we recreate social cohesion? How do we build unity? How do we go back to being real countries? I think that's what's going on all over Europe. That's the explosion. That's the revolution. When that is settled, everything else will fall into place. And I don't know where we turn, because the people I look at on the political spectrum, George, there's nobody like you out there. You know, Andrew Jackson, someone else of Scottish ancestry, once said, one man with courage makes a majority. You've always been a man with courage. Where are the men of courage in British politics? Where are they in American politics? I mean, I got to be frank with you. I look at the people that are standing up in front of the microphone over there in Switzerland, and I get sick to my stomach. Who are we kidding? Who are these people? They're cream puffs. Where are the men in the room who are going to take a firm stand and get something done? And you know as well as I do, you don't negotiate anything in public. You do it all privately. So none of this is serious. It's amateur hour everywhere I look.
Yeah, very much. I made that point in my monologue, amateur hour. Maybe we need a Scottish junta with thee and me and just one or two others. to sort things out. But the morbidities, of course, are different in every country that are produced by the kind of stasis that we now endure rather than enjoy. But this is maybe the hour of the likes of you, the likes of Tucker Carlson, people from outside the political sphere, but who are stepping in because of the abysmal and now chronic failure of the political class. You're right, there's no Churchill on the horizon in Britain, but maybe there's a Churchill in the form of people like you that I've just described. Maybe it's time for the American people to look outside this uniparty, red-blue false dichotomy. What do you say?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I've been involved now with this thing called the National Conversation, trying to build the foundation for a new political party. But the hour hasn't arrived yet, because I hate to be blunt, but unfortunately things have to get worse, George. And they will. They will get worse. There's no question about it. And when things are really bad, remember, when did the French Revolution really break out? They'd had several rebellions in the preceding 30 or 40 years, but when did the revolution break out? When people in France, in Paris, could not afford to buy bread. That's when it really broke. And that's where we're headed.
They could have eaten cake, as the Queen Marie Antoinette famously didn't say. We've got lots of Marie Antoinettes in Mar-a-Lago and in the Democratic Party equivalents. Now that Tucker has left the Republican Party officially, and we're left with the tattered remains of what propelled Donald Trump to power, not once but twice, and maybe even 3 times. He may even have won when he was cheated in 2020. Where did it all go wrong?
I think we have to go back to the people who currently control policy making in Washington. And you're talking about the billionaires that really constitute the power behind the Israel lobby. Everybody thinks in terms of, the Israelis are over here lobbying. No, they don't have to lobby for anything. They're co-religionists here who have billions of dollars. They do that. And they have, over the last 30 to 40 years, I mean, obviously this has always been there, but in the last 30 to 40 years, I think they have invested very heavily in the careers of politicians, to the point where no politician in Washington right now is going to fail to perform for them. And again, in the past, I think politicians thought, well, it doesn't really matter. Nobody really cares about the Palestinians. Nobody cares how many of them die. Nobody cares how many people are killed in Lebanon. Well, now it's gotten larger. It's gotten broader. And we're at the end of this 25-year sojourn in the Middle East that has gotten us nowhere, that's cost us trillions of dollars and harmed our economy. And we have lots of injured, wounded, destroyed lives as a result. It's beginning to have an impact. And Americans are saying, wait a minute, why? Why are you not focused here at home? But again, until gasoline becomes prohibitively expensive, until food doesn't show up on the shelf, till the things you're accustomed to are not there, they're not going to get angry enough to do anything. I hate to be frank, but that's my prognosis.